Top 10 legendary V12 tractors that changed farming. Before GPS-guided tractors and autonomous electric fleets, there was a time when farming horsepower didn't whisper. It roared. Across wheat plains, soybean fields, and unforgiving terrains, a rare breed of machines emerged. Not just to plow, but to dominate. Massive frames, V12 engines, industrial torque that could bend steel implements and rip through packed earth like parchment. These weren't just tractors. They were engineering events. Some were so powerful that governments got involved. Others were so ahead of their time, they became legends or ghosts. Today, we're not just counting horsepower. We're revisiting the titans that redefined what farming could be. It remembers what raw mechanical dominance once looked like, and why a few of these monsters still haunt barns, fields, and collector vaults. Stay with us, because number one on this list was banned from most fields, not for what it lacked, but for being just too much. Don't forget to press and hold that like button, leave a comment, and hit subscribe before we begin. Ranked 10th, Rite 750 Earthquake. The V12 tractor, built by farmers, not corporations. Some machines are remembered for the number built. The Rite 750 Earthquake is remembered because so few were. It wasn't designed by a multinational brand or unveiled at a global expo. It came from Montana, not the state, but the soil. In the late 1980s, Rite Engineering and Manufacturing began building custom tractors for the kind of farmers who didn't need showroom polish. They needed raw power. The Earthquake was the apex of that vision, a fully articulated 8-wheel drive steel monster driven by a Detroit diesel 12V 92 V12 engine. It produced over 750 horsepower and weighed more than 25 tons, with no plastic panels. No diagnostics, no luxury, just a welded plate, bolted axles, and a transmission designed to outlast a generation. Its purpose was brutally specific: deep ripping of hardpan. Across the high plains, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, decades of tillage had compressed a subsurface layer so dense that traditional equipment bounced off it. The Earthquake didn't bounce. It sank in, dragged shanks over 2 feet deep, and tore vertical seams into geological resistance. In doing so, it unlocked water penetration, root growth, and an entirely new area of viability. These weren't machines for average farms. They were built to order for families managing thousands of acres, operations where downtime could cost hundreds of acres a day. The Earthquake wasn't just strong, it was serviceable. Its components, engine, drivetrain, hydraulics, were chosen not for their branding, but for their fixability by a single man with a welder and a parts truck. There are no official production numbers, but fewer than a dozen are believed to exist. Most were used hard and retired quietly. A few survive in sheds, still operable. When collectors find them, they don't restore them to showroom condition. They keep wearing the dents, the smell of diesel baked into steel. Because these weren't museum pieces, they were the working anatomy of a philosophy. Build only what works, make it big, make it last. The Rite Earthquake didn't win design awards. It wasn't written about in magazines. But every operator who sat in that cab understood precisely what it was: the last word in no-nonsense American farm engineering. And for the fields it conquered, that was more than enough. Ranked 9th, IMT 5500. The V12 tractor that powered a country without exports. While most of the world looked west for agricultural innovation, Yugoslavia built its path, and the IMT 5500 was the result. Developed in the 1980s under a state-driven industrial strategy, the tractor was one of the few examples where Cold War economics and raw mechanical need aligned. Built by Industria Mašina I Traktora in Belgrade, the IMT 5500 combined a locally engineered chassis with a V12 diesel engine sourced from Mercedes-Benz, or FAB, the latter being a Yugoslav adaptation of West German engine architecture. Producing over 500 horsepower and weighing more than 20 tons, it was a behemoth designed not for show, but for state-owned cooperatives managing thousands of hectares under a centrally planned model. This machine was never exported to the West. It didn't appear at trade shows in Paris or Chicago. It worked in the Pannonian Basin, pulling 8-meter harrows across dense Balkan soil, dragging fertilizer rigs over flat collectivized fields from Vojvodina to the Danube Delta. The operators weren't private farmers. They were assigned technicians. The maintenance logs weren't filed in dealerships. They were recorded in government books. When parts wore out, they weren't replaced with boxed OEM components. They were welded, swapped, or substituted from Soviet surplus. Mechanically, the IMT 5500 was massive and straightforward. Articulated steering, mechanical linkage, analog gauges, exposed wiring. There was no insulation in the cabin, no standard air conditioning, just sheet metal, engine heat, and a throttle that never seemed to hesitate. The V12 engine delivered power with a deep, industrial growl, matched only by its fuel consumption. But fuel efficiency was not the objective. Land movement was. Today, very few survive. Most were cannibalized for parts during the privatization waves of the 1990s. A handful remain, either as static displays in Serbian museums or still running in rural Croatian cooperatives, their original paint long worn off, but the drive shafts still intact. In the West, the IMT 5500 is virtually unknown, but for those who worked in its shadow, it wasn't just a tractor. It was the mechanical backbone of a system that tried to make industry and agriculture move as one. Ranked 8th, Big Bud 650/50, the custom V12 tractor that never went to market. Most people who've heard of Big Bud know the 747, the world's largest farm tractor. But before that icon came into existence, a smaller, quieter, and in many ways more personal machine left its mark across the plains of Montana. The Big Bud 650/50. Built by Northern Manufacturing in the mid-1980s, only a handful were ever produced. Most sources cite 6 units, each one built on request. These weren't showroom models. They were custom commissions, engineered by hand, for individual farmers who had outgrown every available solution. The heart of the 650/50 was a Detroit diesel 12V92, a V12 two-stroke diesel engine built for serious work in logging, marine, and mining. With 650 horsepower and torque measured in thousands of foot-pounds, the 650/50 wasn't fast, but it never stalled. Its frame was constructed with twin-rail steel, designed to withstand year-round stress without fatigue cracking. The articulation system used overbuilt cylinders, high-clearance joints, and reinforced pivot bearings. Not to be agile, but to survive. This was not a tractor for 100 acres. It was designed for operations pushing past 5,000 acres of dryland wheat, where you needed to keep a chisel plow running for 18 hours a day. And breakdowns meant losing harvest windows worth thousands of dollars per hour. Each machine was tailored to its buyer. Some had minor modifications in transmission gearing, others in hydraulic flow rate or hitch assembly. There was no marketing department. The spec sheet was a conversation, often directly between the engineer and the farmer. The 650/50s had no serial badge, no collector pedigree. They worked, and in doing so, they became invisible legends. Machines so effective that their existence was confirmed more by word of mouth than brochure. A few were retired in the late 90s. Others continued into the 2000s, upgraded with new radiators, larger tires, and even complete engine replacements with modern Tier 2 compliant blocks. But the chassis, the soul of the machine, remained the same. What separates the 650/50 from the machines that came before and after is intent. It was not built to compete. It wasn't a platform for accessories or a showcase for cab comfort. It was built to pull, period. And in a landscape where distance, drought, and dust define daily decisions, that simplicity made all the difference. It didn't aim for headlines. It aimed for uptime. And for the farmers who received one, it was never just a tractor. It was a contract. Strength in exchange for stewardship, power in exchange for care. And decades later, that agreement still holds. Ranked 7th, versatile 1150. The last V12 tractor built for the real world. By the early 1980s, the rules of farm power were shifting. Tractors were getting larger, wider, heavier, but also more efficient. And for a brief window in that transition, the versatile 1150 stood at the front line of both trends. Built in Winnipeg, Canada, the 1150 was among the last commercially successful farm tractors powered by a V12 engine. In this case, the Cummins KTTA-1150, a 12-cylinder turbocharged diesel block originally designed for over-the-road freight and mine trucks. Rated at around 470 horsepower and bolted into a fully articulated steel frame with a Fuller Road Ranger manual gearbox. The 1150 was engineered not for comfort, not for electronics, but for pure mechanical output over thousands of acres. The farms that bought the 1150 didn't need persuasion. They already knew what the machine could do. In Saskatchewan and Manitoba, where wheat and barley fields run to the horizon, the 1150 allowed operators to pull 60-foot implements with stability and precision, even through hard spring ground. The cab was Spartan. Gauges were analog. Steering was hydraulic but stiff, designed to give road feel in an environment with no roads. The sound of the V12 was unmistakable. A deep, rolling cadence that echoed across the prairie long before the machine arrived. What made the 1150 special wasn't just its power, it was the timing. It arrived when big was still good, but smart was getting better. Fuel prices were rising, emissions rules were tightening, and while the KTTA 412 delivered extraordinary performance, it also burned through diesel like an open faucet. Within 5 years, Versatile began moving toward inline 6-cylinder turbo diesels, engines that could deliver nearly the same torque with fewer moving parts and far less fuel. The 1150 was never officially discontinued. A new generation of engineering priorities outgrew it. Today, the 1150 occupies a rare place in the timeline of farm equipment. It wasn't the biggest, it wasn't the most extreme, but it was one of the last true V12 workhorses that could be ordered straight from a catalog and sent directly to work on the Canadian plains. A few still run, often restored by collectors who appreciate not just the engine, but the era it came from. A time when horsepower still meant pistons, size still meant steel, and power wasn't a menu of options, it was a declaration. Ranked 6th. Steiger Tiger IV, the last V12 before the spreadsheet era. Before K-701, before red paint, before digital controls, there was the Steiger Tiger IV KM325, a tractor that sat at the very top of Steiger's production line during a period when horsepower defined hierarchy. Produced in limited numbers between the late 1970s and early 1980s, the KM325 was fitted with a Caterpillar 3408 V12 diesel engine, a block more commonly found in quarry hauliers and industrial power units. With over 325 horsepower delivered through a heavy-duty manual gearbox, the KM325 wasn't just built to pull, it was built to dominate. Articulated steering, oversized axles, reinforced steel construction, and a cooling system capable of sustaining full load under Texas heat. Every component was scaled for continuous, high-pressure work across land that punished weaker designs. The cabin offered little comfort, but complete visibility. The dashboard was functional. No frills, just function. And the engine note? A deliberate, slow-burning V12 growl that could be heard half a mile before the tractor crested the field edge. Tiger IV was not made for every farm. It was for operations that demanded absolute performance, the kind that couldn't afford 2 passes when one would do. Its scale and engineering gave it a near mythical status among operators in Nebraska and Oklahoma. But for all its presence, the Tiger IV KM325 was also a transitional figure. Fuel economy was poor, service access was difficult, and as Cummins and later Case IH shifted focus to inline 6-cylinder turbos, the era of V12s in production, Steiger's quietly faded. No marketing campaign ever declared it obsolete. It wasn't reissued. Dealers stopped listing it. Manuals went out of print. And by the time Case took over Steiger, the KM325 had already become a collector's machine. Not for its looks, but for what it represented. The last time Steiger asked what was possible without first asking what was practical. Today, restored Tiger IVs appear at tractor pulls, vintage showcases, and agricultural museums. Often misidentified, sometimes misunderstood. But those who know the badge, who know the roar of the 3408 under torque, recognize it immediately. Not just as a machine, but as a statement that before the spreadsheets and sensors, there was a time when engineers led with steel and followed it with fire. Ranked fifth, ACO 600 Oubaas, the V12 tractor built in isolation. There are places where farming isn't about seasons. It's about survival. In the dry, sun-scorched farmlands of South Africa's Highveld, machines don't just work, they endure. And no machine understood that better than the ACO 600, known locally as Oubaas. Built in Bloemfontein during the 1980s, the Oubaas was a response to a national challenge. International sanctions had cut South Africa off from foreign tractor markets. Importing big horsepower was no longer an option. So ACO Engineering built their own from the ground up, with steel sourced locally, designs tailored to local soil, and power provided by a Mercedes-licensed ADE V12 diesel pushing over 800 horsepower. The result was a machine that didn't follow global trends. It ignored comfort, skipped electronics, and focused instead on thermal resilience, deep rip torque, and frame durability under the kind of mechanical stress that breaks lesser tractors in a single season. The Oubaas was equipped with an industrial cooling system designed to run for 20 hours straight in 40 degrees Celsius heat. It could pull direct seed planters across 100 hectares without slowing. It required 2 people to service, and it didn't stop unless metal failed. Every angle of its frame was over-engineered. The axles were sourced from military surplus. The transmission was hand-mated to the block in small assembly bays by engineers who understood that downtime in the Highveld isn't an inconvenience. It's a threat to the year's yield. Few people outside southern Africa ever saw one. Most were delivered directly to mega farms managing over 20,000 acres. There was no advertising, no brochures, just orders, fulfilled by trucks, not dealers. Over time, some Oubaas units were dismantled, others retrofitted. But among those who ran them, the name still carries weight. In a land where reliability trumps reputation, the ACO 600 was more than a tractor. It was a fortress on wheels, a machine born of isolation, built for punishment, and remembered not because it spread, but because it never surrendered. Ranked fourth, Kirovets K-701, the V12 tractor that outlasted a superpower. The Kirovets K-701 was not an experiment. It was a policy. Designed in Leningrad and rolled out across the Soviet Union from 1975 onward, the K-701 was the mechanical response to one of the most significant state-driven agricultural initiatives in human history. With collective farms spanning thousands of hectares and no access to imported tractors, the USSR needed power on its terms. The K-701 delivered that power through a YAM-Z 240 V12 diesel engine, a block derived from heavy military vehicles, designed to withstand shock, vibration, and extreme cold. With up to 400 horsepower, a full-time 4-wheel drive articulated chassis, and axles adapted from industrial-grade transport platforms, the K-701 was built not for flexibility, but for force. It plowed frozen soil in western Siberia. It worked dusty cotton fields in Uzbekistan. It pulled harvesters in Belarus and tilled wheatland outside Kiev. Thousands were produced. Operators were trained in state schools. Maintenance schedules were printed in centralized manuals. There was no dealership network, only state depots, where parts arrived in crates and repairs were done in-house. Everything about the K-701 was scaled. Its fuel tanks, its cooling systems, its gear ratios. It could run 20-hour shifts without rest, often in pairs or fleets, coordinated like military columns. Even its sound was distinct, the deep metallic churn of 12 cylinders firing with the rhythm of post-war industry. What sets the K-701 apart decades later is that many are still running, not as relics, but as tools. Some have been converted, others restored, some repainted and exported. But the frame remains, the engine in many cases remains. And in the former Soviet territories where infrastructure can still be unreliable and budgets are tight, the K-701 is not a piece of history. It's a daily solution. Not because it's ideal, but because it still works. Because it was never made to impress. It was made to continue. To run through frost, dust, politics, and time. And so far it has. Ranked third, Schlüter 5000 TVL, the V12 tractor built for perfection, not production. Most tractors are remembered for what they did. This one is remembered for what it almost was. The Schlüter Profi Track 5000 TVL was built in 1978 as a singular prototype, a one-off vision of what a European high-horsepower tractor could become if no compromise were made. Powered by a twin-turbo Mayen D2542 V12 diesel engine, producing over 500 horsepower, mounted to a full-frame four-wheel drive chassis with symmetric drive axles and advanced hydraulic distribution, the 5000 TVL wasn't a machine, it was an engineering statement. Hand-assembled in Munich by a team of precision engineers, every inch of the chassis was overbuilt. The gearbox came from military logistics trucks, the differential system was split for uniform load, and the cab, airtight and pressure-balanced, was modeled after Alpine industrial cranes. Its purpose wasn't to farm, it was to outclass. It was meant to surpass anything from Steiger, Versatile, or Fiat Agri, and prove that German engineering could deliver big tractor performance without North American bulk. The project culminated in a public debut at the DLG show in 1978, where it attracted immediate attention and a long list of questions. Who would maintain it? What implements could even match it? And more urgently, in a Europe recovering from oil shocks, who could afford to run it? By the early 1980s, the answers had narrowed. There would be no production run. Fuel economics, tooling compatibility, and sheer operating costs made the 5000 TVL commercially impossible. And so the only one ever built was stored, occasionally operated, but never sent to market. Today, the Schlüter Profi Track 5000 TVL is housed in a German museum, fully restored, still functional. Its paint remains vivid, its engine turns over like clockwork. But its legacy isn't in the soil, it's in the silence that follows every conversation about what might have been. In an industry built on utility, the 5000 was something else entirely. A machine that didn't just ask, what do we need? But dared to ask, what if we aim for perfection, even if no one was ready for it? Ranked second, Versatile 1080 Big Roy, Canada's one and only V12 giant. Before the age of digital sensors and satellite-linked tractors, there was Big Roy, a one-of-a-kind mechanical marvel designed not for mass adoption, but for a vision that never repeated itself. Built in 1977 in Winnipeg, Manitoba, the Versatile 1080, affectionately known as Big Roy, was a bold prototype that pushed every known limit of tractor engineering at the time. Powered by a Cummins KTA 1150 V12 turbo diesel, producing around 600 horsepower, mounted in a rear-engine configuration, and balanced on a rigid 8-wheel frame, Big Roy wasn't just large, it was a reimagination of the tractor altogether. The cabin, elevated above the massive front axle, provided 360-degree visibility with wraparound glass and full command over a powertrain capable of hauling the largest implements on the continent. The front carried nothing but control. The rear, a full-length drivetrain leading to a 30-foot-long engine compartment designed to run for days without compromise. But as with many experiments ahead of their time, Big Roy entered a world that wasn't quite ready. While the tractor operated as intended and even outperformed expectations in test plots across Saskatchewan, its rigid frame made turning radius a challenge, especially in tight prairie fields. Its weight made transportation difficult, often requiring special permissions and an escort. Its power was unquestionable, but its practicality, in a post-oil shock economy, became harder to justify. There was also the issue of compatibility. Few implement manufacturers had designs that matched its scale, and no farmer could afford to risk an entire planting season on a prototype with no production run. And so, after a brief period of trial, the one and only Big Roy was retired and not sold and not scrapped, stored, quietly. For nearly 30 years, the machine remained still, parked, mentioned occasionally in farming circles, photographed rarely. But in 2015, a group of restoration engineers, museum curators, and former versatile employees came together to bring it back to life. The goal wasn't cosmetic, it was operational. Every hydraulic line was checked. Every piston is inspected. The massive V12 engine, unused for decades, was flushed, resealed, and fired again. The tires, custom and irreplaceable, were preserved. Today, Big Roy isn't just on display at the Manitoba Agricultural Museum. It starts, it drives, it runs, it breathes history. Unlike other prototypes that disappeared into blueprints or scrap, Big Roy became a monument, a story cast in steel, a symbol of what Canadian engineering attempted when market tests or dealership projections didn't bind it. It wasn't meant to become an icon, but sometimes a machine only needs to exist once for people to remember it forever. In first place, Big Bud 747, the one V16 tractor that was never outworked. There is a large, it is powerful, and then there is Big Bud 16 V747, the largest farm tractor ever built, and the only one of its kind to earn global recognition not as a concept, but as a machine that worked. Commissioned in 1977 by the Rossi brothers of California, this behemoth was not a marketing stunt. It was an answer to a fundamental question. What do you build when 500 horsepower isn't enough and downtime isn't an option? The team at Northern Manufacturing in Montana responded with a 27-foot-long, 14-foot-tall, twin-turbocharged, 16-cylinder diesel force of nature. At its heart was a Detroit diesel 16V92T, a two-bank V16 engine used initially in trains, mining equipment, and naval vessels, producing over 900 horsepower on delivery, later tuned to more than 1,100. Unlike many record-breaking machines, the 747 wasn't preserved in a hangar or showcased at an expo. It was delivered to a farm. It ran. It pulled 80-foot cultivators. It tilled 3,000 acres in a single week. It worked through California dust, Montana frost, and midsummer heat with no cabin pressurization, no digital systems, and no engineering excuses. The frame was solid steel. The articulation joints were thicker than a man's torso. The tires, custom-built 8-foot Goodyears, were so large they required special equipment just to be inflated. The transmission, a twin-disc 13-speed, never missed under torque. And when the job changed, the machine adapted, repainted, refitted, retuned. It was neither obsolete nor outclassed. It was simply too many machines for a changing economy. By the early 2000s, Big Bud was semi-retired. Not broken, not sold, but too large to justify on newer field sizes. Still, the machine lived on. In 2009, it was restored. In 2014, it returned to its birthplace in Big Sandy, Montana. Today, it starts with the same roar. It drives under its power. And when farmers, engineers, and families gather to see it, they don't just admire the scale, they recognize what it represents. An era where American farm engineering didn't ask how small things could be made, but how far strength could be pushed before the machine broke first. Big Bud never broke. What began as simple combustion engines pulling plows has evolved into mechanical legends that rewrote the limits of rural engineering. From Canadian colossi built to dominate open prairies, to Soviet machines tailored for unforgiving steppes, these tractors weren't just tools, they were turning points. Each one carried its answer to a question farmers didn't always have time to ask. How much power is too much? And when does it stop being practical? And yet, decades later, they still pull attention. Because even when their engines fall silent, their impact remains measurable. In harvest made possible, in records still unmatched, and in the quiet pride of those who drove them. This was not just a list of machines. It was a journey through the iron spine of modern agriculture. And somewhere along the road, one of them might have built the land beneath your feet.